Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Michaela, and in today's video, I'm here to discuss the worst and most disappointing books that I read in June. Now, in this video, I do not have any 1-star books to discuss, so that is a win. However, I did have a few 2- and 3-star books. The 3-star books I have to discuss are not terrible, okay? They're not the worst books ever. They're middle of the road, they're not amazing, so they fit into this video. Let's go ahead and get right into it though. The first book I want to discuss is The Bequest by Joanna Margaret. This one was a very frustrating read. I also feel like because it had a lot of potential from the synopsis and it just did not live up to it. So this is a dark academia thriller. So this book has quite a wild premise, so please bear with me as I try to explain this to you. So we're following our main character who is going for her master's, I believe, and she's going to study under this very famous female professor. However, when she arrives at the school, the professor has just been murdered, so she has to study under a different, professor advisor. While studying at this school, the protagonist meets a friend. Okay, but I think she knew this girl in her undergrad. They are friends from the past, and they reconnect in this master's program and get close again. And then the friend disappears, okay? We find out that she's been kidnapped, and that friend contacts the protagonist and tells her that she needs help. The friend needs the help of the main character to help her finish her master's thesis, which has something to do with finding this ancient emerald, okay? And if the protagonist can find this emerald, then the friend can go free from these kidnappers. Basically, the protagonist spends the rest of the book studying ancient Italian history, trying to find this emerald and get her friend set free, and also dating several much older men. Honestly, it has a very convoluted plot premise, and it just was not very well done in my opinion. The impression I got after finishing this book was slimy, okay? The amount of young woman dating old man, infatuation in this book was quite off-putting to me. There are several side plot romances with way older men. She is a college-age woman dating men in their 50s, and it just was very tiring to read. I'm sick of these plots where we see bright, young, lively women with old, boring, pretentious men, and these women being obsessed with them like they're the most interesting thing in the world. This book was very boring. The chapters were very long, and like I said, it is very cheesy. The writing was not it, okay? Well, we're watching the main character develop this friendship with this random girl that apparently they knew in their undergrad. There is this scene where they go skinny dipping, and the main character is like, I'm free, and it was so cringy and awkward, and I don't know, maybe it was just how it was narrated. Also, there is way too much focus on her dating that old man professor. Wherever she goes, she's dating somebody. She's dating this different older dude, okay? All throughout the book, there's different love interests. And there's too much focus on that and not her saving this friend who has apparently been kidnapped by this mafia group who wants this emerald. There's also a ridiculous amount of Italian history that I was so not interested in. It was so boring. The amount of 16th century history in this book, I could not follow. I also found it so unbelievable that the friend is kidnapped, and she tells the main character not to go tell the cops, because if she does tell the cops, these mafia members are gonna kill the friend's father. The character motivations did not make sense to me. The main character and the friend were not that good of friends, they reconnect, but there's not enough time that goes by where they get close enough to justify the main character putting her whole life on hold and taking up this girl's thesis and trying to complete it for her. The amount of danger and stakes that the author's trying to convince me is at stake just does not make sense why she would not go to the police. I just found the main character really insufferable. All of the characters were insufferable. The friend, all of the love interests, the old men who continue to gaslight this main character was so frustrating to me. Honestly, this book could have been cool and fun and had a really different dark academia storyline. I just don't think it was executed well. It also has terrible ratings on Goodreads. So this is an instance where Goodreads is not lying to you when you look at the bad ratings. Let's go ahead and move on though. The next book I have to talk about, my next 2-star book, and I do feel really bad about this because I know a lot of people really like this book. That book is Monstrilio by 𝚲𝚃𝚃𝚃𝚃𝚃 Cordavo. Unfortunately, this one just was not for me, and I know several people really love this book. I feel so guilty for only giving it 2 stars. I just think it was not for me. So basically in this book, we're following a couple of different POVs. First, we're following a mother who, her very young son has just passed away, and she is very grief-stricken. So what she does is she basically cuts out a piece of her dead son's lung and puts it in a jar, and that lung starts to grow into like a monster. How this book read to me was like 30% monster coming of age story, and the rest of this book, the rest of the 70% of this book read like graphic sexual like kink stuff, okay? And it just made me extremely uncomfortable. I also still do not understand the shapes on the cover at all. Like, if you guys loved this book and you get it, can you explain to me what those shapes mean? Because I don't get it at all. There are 4 different character perspectives that we follow, and I was very confused when we would switch character perspective. I kind of wish this book would have only followed the mother's perspective. Like I said, when we pick up the book, we are following the mom who has just lost her young son. And I thought going into this book that she would be the POV we would follow the whole time, but no, we follow her through 25% of this book, and then we switch to another character that I didn't understand why we needed to be seeing the story through her lens, and then we follow a couple of other characters as well. I just also thought it was a very weird juxtaposition of like that grief aspect, you know, like in the very beginning, it's sad, there is a lot of focus on loss, and then we switch to graphic sex scenes and the sexual kinks of the characters. I thought I was getting into a grief horror going into this book, but it felt like it was just about kinks and sex, and that did not make sense with the grief aspect at all. I don't feel like that aspect was in the marketing of this book. I don't feel like it was in the synopsis of this book. So regardless of the symbolism behind why it was included, if I had known that that was so heavily centered in this novel, I would not have picked this up because I would have known that it was not going to be for me and not going to be something I enjoyed. It's one that I did think was written very well, but the story was just not for me. Like I said, I know a lot of people love this book, but again, I just didn't get it. Okay, the next book I have to talk about is another one that just was not for me, okay? And that book was Sister Maiden Monster. This is a post-pandemic story where basically the world is stuck in a new pandemic involving different cases of people who crave eating brains or drinking blood. It's also told through multiple POVs. Again, this was a 2-star book for me, and it was another case where it just was not for me. Okay, this one probably has an audience, but I am not that audience. There were a few glimmers where I thought I would really like this book, where I was really liking this book. There was like apocalyptic dystopian aspects of it that I really enjoyed for maybe the first 20% of the book, okay? I genuinely found it very interesting. But quickly after that, it started to go downhill for me. There was a tedious amount of characterization that we had to go through because this book is split up into 3 different parts. It's similar to Monstrilio actually, where we follow one character POV and then we switch to another character POV and we don't go back to that first one. So for 1/3 of the book, we're following the main character Aaron, and then we switch and then we switch, okay? And I found it very jarring. I did not like having to start over with a new character 3 times and go through all of the new characterization of learning that person. There is also, once again, a lot of graphic sex in this book, which, like, you guys might be coming to find out is just not for me. There was very cheesy writing. Holy moly, was this writing unbearably cheesy and just confusing illogical science that I could not wrap my brain around. Okay, some examples of the very intensely cheesy writing was, for example, the author would have the main character say y'all. Okay, she would say y'all. She would use it very casually over and over again, and it just felt very rough to me. It felt very repetitive to me. I do wish that this book had focused more on this new pandemic that's going on and less on all the romantic relationships between the characters. There is, in the beginning, very early on, an aspect of this book that I really had an issue with, and it has to do with an open relationship between the main character and her fiance. It felt very selfish to me. It made me hate the main character. And like I said, there was also a lot of on-page sex thrown into this book that was very off-putting to me. Graphic sex is just very boring, okay? It's very boring for me to read about. So this book felt like a chore to me. I do wish we could have just followed the first POV Aaron's character the entire time. I didn't get why it was necessary to have split POVs. Part 2 I hated with a burning passion. I had to skim the whole thing. And part 3 just felt very weak to me. The whole book was very choppy because we spend so much time in part 1, Aaron's characterization, and then we abandon her, okay? We abandon her character and we have to completely rebuild and start over 3 times. We spend so much time on the start of the infection and every grueling detail that went into it, and then the later half of the book was so thin. I just felt like the author was writing multiple books that didn't quite go together. The ending also felt utterly pointless to me and was way too abrupt. There was no resolution whatsoever. Like, I am fine with an open ending, okay? But this just felt like it ended with none of the loose ends being cleaned up. Also, the scientific aspect of this octopus sushi thing was so dumb to me. Like I said, I could not get my brain to wrap around this illogical scientific thing. This one just was not for me. Okay, 2 stars. Moving on to my 3-star books. The first one I want to speak about is The Lake House by Sarah Beth Durst. So in this book, we are following 3 main characters, and they are going to stay at a camp for the summer. So they are dropped off by this boat at this camp, and they have to like walk through the woods to get to the lake house campsite. However, when they make it to the house, they see that it is burned down, okay, and there is a dead body inside that appears to have been shot. There's no other people there, and the boat that ferried them there has already left. The girls then have to figure out how to survive in the forest despite knowing that whoever committed the crime might still be out there somewhere. Despite this book being silly at times, I still felt like it was a good time overall. I had a lot of fun reading this. It does play, okay, so this is YA, all right? And it plays very heavily into this melodramatic teenage, no one understands me angst, which did get frustrating, or it got frustrating to me as a 27-year-old adult reading this book about teenagers. I did also think that the main character, Claire, could be very, very annoying, okay, like really annoying. She lacks self-confidence, and that is very relatable, especially to a teenage audience. However, often it was frustrating to read about because it was like she would be going in circles. I also felt like the book spent too much time talking about the backstories of these girls and their emotions and feelings and their parents, and like I said, this no one understands me narrative that we always see with teenagers. But this book did have a trope that I personally love. One of my favorite tropes is survival stories, man versus nature stories, so that aspect made me not want to put this book down. And maybe my favorite part about this book was that it did not have a strong romance subplot, which in YA is so rare, okay? It is very difficult to find YA books that do not have a strong romance in the subplot. This one focuses primarily on female friendships, which I loved, and I think that's why I initially rated it a 4-star, because I had such like good happy feelings at the end of it. All in all, I think many people are gonna find this one silly, especially if you do not like reading YA, okay? The ultimate twist of what's going on is also a bit silly. I get it, okay? I agree with that, but it's an interesting read. It's a quick one, a quick summer thriller. The next book I read in June that was a 3-star was Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth. I thought that I would enjoy this one a lot more than I did. It ended up being quite a letdown. Mother Thing is basically about a woman's mother-in-law who dies in her house, which then becomes haunted by the mother-in-law's ghost. This one took me quite a while to get into, and I know some of that probably had to do with this reading slump that I was in for most of the beginning of June. I felt like I wasn't really very interested in this book until the last third, and I think also some of that comes down to me being so deliriously tired of reading about marital issues and family dramas. The amount of things that this woman, the main character, puts up with for her husband, it just did not feel genuine to me. It was frustrating the way that she put her husband on this pedestal, and it made me sad and exhausted hearing about it. The second half of the book does become more interesting though, because the obsession with the main character's husband becomes less like prevalent in the story, and it becomes more about the main character and focuses more on her becoming more and more unhinged. I do wish this book had focused more on the main character and her past, which I thought was very interesting and very sad. I would have liked it to focus more on her and less her obsessing over her husband and having a baby and becoming a mother, which is such a tired trope in fiction. I'm really sick of it. There's an aspect of the main character working at a senior citizen's home, which I thought was so interesting and fascinating, and the psychology behind the main character's like intense interest with one of the residents there, I was hooked by, and I wanted the book to focus more on that. While, like I said, it does pick up towards the last third of the book, I didn't ultimately understand the ending and what the ending was trying to say. The last chapter was a chore. I think this book could have been a 4 for me because the last third does pick up quite a bit, but the last chapter just did not make sense to me, and it brought it back down to a 3. And once again, it goes back to focusing solely on this main character being a wife and her desire for motherhood, which I'm just personally tired of reading about. The next 3-star book that I have to speak about is Girls and Their Horses by Eliza Jane Brazier. Now, this one was not bad at all, okay? It's a typical thriller. So if you don't read a ton of thrillers, I think that you might really enjoy this one. I found that it didn't have as many of the insufferable thriller tropes that we typically see used over and over again. I would say that this one is medium to slow pace, so go into it knowing that it's not going to be like a super quick one. But I did find that it just doesn't stand out in many other ways other than the very different setting that it has. So in Girls and Their Horses, we are following a family who has recently come into quite a bit of money, and they are moving to a new home, and the mother decides to enroll her daughters in this local horse stables program for horse riders, and murder ensues, typical thriller plot, blah blah blah. Now, I personally really liked this one because I love horses. I have never really ridden horses, maybe like once or twice in my life I've ridden horses, but I've always loved and had a thing for horses. It is my dream one day to have horses. I would love to have horses, or even know somebody who has horses that I can come over and ride them. So that aspect of this book really like struck a chord with me personally, and I had fun with that aspect. It kind of felt like the Saddle Club for adults, you know? Now, one major gripe I did have with this book was something to do with a plot twist that happens towards the end with this teenage romance we have going on throughout the book. The plot twist around that made me very uncomfortable, okay? I didn't think it was realistic. I didn't think it was relevant. It felt very fake and regressive to me, honestly. Overall, though, I did enjoy this one, and I am excited to read more from this author in the future. The last somewhat disappointing book that I read in June was The Last Heir to Blackwood Library by Hester Fox. Now, I have been craving books like this lately, okay? I want to read slower mysteries, gothic mysteries, and this one grabbed me because of the cover, because of the title. In this one, we are following our main character who is inheriting this great grand estate, okay, from her recently deceased relative. She moves into this estate and she becomes obsessed with the library that clearly has something very odd going on about it. Throughout the book, she gets entangled in this like romantic relationship, and then she also starts this lending program out of her like house library. I do want to say with this book right off the bat, I was really enjoying the gothic vibes of it, and the setting of a magical library I thought was so fun. I was finding this book to be so readable and quiet and generally uncomplicated, which is what I wanted going into it. However, though, while I did really enjoy the start of this book, I eventually started to become very frustrated with it. The characters in this book are generally unlikable. For example, the protagonist Ivy, I found her incredibly annoying and short-sighted. I found it frustrating how she seemed to have blinders on and she couldn't tell that this very obviously suspicious character was trying to take advantage of her. Something that seemed so obvious to me that I just didn't like how she had no suspicion or intuition whatsoever around that character. Also, once again, like this keeps coming up, I did not like how strong of a romance subplot was in this book. It was boring to me. I felt like we could have skipped it. I would have liked more focus on the magical library and the books and everything going on around that, which was very cool and interesting. The last thing about this book that was very annoying was the like epilogue, the end of this book. Pretty much this book ends and then there's still about like 10% left. That's pretty much the epilogue of the main character having this like resolution around the romance, and it was just unnecessary, okay? It went on way too long. I'm looking for gothic mystery vibes. I want the spooky stuff, okay? I don't want all this like romance in the background. That could have been cut. But overall, that one wasn't terrible. If you guys like cozy mysteries, if you want a gothic book, gothic mystery, you might enjoy this one more than I did. Now, all the books that I just spoke about are the worst and disappointing books that I read in June. However, saying that, none of these books were atrocious, all right? Some of these books are very popular. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. I always say this, just because I've given something a bad review, if you're interested in that synopsis, I still would say check any of these books out and give it a try for yourself, because you might like it more than I did, and that's perfectly fine, and I love that, okay? I'm happy if you guys like these books. I'm also curious if you guys like how I decided to film this June wrap-up, how I split it up into 2 separate videos. So let me know in the comments if you guys like me splitting up my June wrap-up. If you would rather me go back to filming them all in one video, I can definitely do that too. Let me know whatever you guys like better. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.